This conference will now be recorded.
Very good. Welcome to this evening's program, everybody. I am Neil Kennedy, a reference librarian here at Lawrence Headquarters Branch. Before this evening's program, I actually want to invite all of you to the upcoming event titled The American Revolution and the Fate of the World on Tuesday, May 19th at 7 p.m., presented by historian and author Richard Bell, a professor of history at the University of Maryland. I'm actually going to copy a URL into the chat. 1 second. Got that link for that event right there. I also want to say thank you to Friends of the West Windsor Library for sponsoring the upcoming events in our community. And I invite all of you to visit our online calendar on our website to locate other virtual program offerings, as well as events taking place at all 9 of the MCLS branches. Also going to include a link to that calendar right now. There we go. So tonight's program, titled The Timeline of Lawrence History, 300 Years and 60 Images, is the final program in the Lawrence History series offered by Dennis Waters. Dennis is an author, scientist, and retired internet entrepreneur. His first book, titled Behavior and Culture in One Dimension, was published in 2021 by Routledge. He is a visiting scientist at Rutgers University, studying lichens of central New Jersey, and for 12 years, was township historian in Lawrenceville. He represents Lawrence Township on the Mercer County Library Commission as well. Thank you. Welcome, Dennis.
And thank you, Neil. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. Hopefully, you can see the slide share so we can get started. In my years as Lawrence Township historian, I had the privilege of giving many talks on subjects related to local history. And since the pandemic, I've been working with the Mercer County Library System to present all of these talks virtually and to record them and preserve them for future reference. And all of these recorded talks are available on the library's YouTube channel, and this one will be soon. This one, as Neil said, though, is the last of the bunch. Once it's in the can, we'll have recorded each of the talks I gave over my dozen years as historian. And this also has the broadest scope of the talks, covering just over 300 years of Lawrence's history. I originally gave it to celebrate the installation of a history timeline mural on a wall at the municipal building opposite the construction office. Production and installation of that mural was funded by a grant to the Lawrence Historical Society from the Lawrence Township Community Foundation, and we remain grateful for their support. The timeline can be viewed whenever the building is open, and I encourage you to go over and have a look. It's pretty cool. We wanted to make the timeline visually interesting, especially for visiting school children, so we deliberately chose 60 events that could be represented by an image of some kind. Of course, not every important event in township history can be represented by an image, so you have to keep that in mind. And we also had to choose a starting point and an ending point. The timeline ends in the 1990s, old enough to be considered history, but not quite crossing the line into current affairs. We know that the land now occupied by Lawrence was inhabited for many thousands of years before the Europeans arrived. The 17th century saw the first big influx of European settlers into what is now New Jersey, and the late 1600s were a complicated time in the colony. The Dutch fought the British fought the British. We had Dukes of York and Carterets and Berkeleys and the proprietors of East and West Jersey. Most of them were rich Englishmen who never set foot on this side of the Atlantic. We chose to start the Lawrence timeline in 1687, here in the upper left corner, and with this man, George Keith. Like many of the most educated men of his time, Keith was trained as a clergyman. And after serving for a few years as a Quaker missionary, he was sent to the New World to be Surveyor General of New Jersey. Shortly after arriving, he was appointed by the proprietors of West and East Jersey to survey the imaginary line that separated the two provinces. And since the land that was eventually to become Lawrence was at the east end of West Jersey, I'll say that again slowly, the east end of West Jersey, we should not be surprised that the ancient boundary line he laid out remains part of our township's border. Now, before we continue, I want to point out a feature of this talk, and that is this little timeline icon in the lower left corner. There are 60 images in the timeline, but there are more than 60 in my talk. So this icon identifies images that are taken directly from the timeline. Okay, George Keith. If you travel up to Hopewell at the corner of Route 518 and Province Line Road, you'll see this marker that shows George Keith's handiwork. He started at Little Egg Harbor down here and made good progress across the coastal plain. The dotted line up here on the marker shows the part he did not complete. Essentially, he got about this far, which was the south branch of the Raritan River, and at that point he realized he was way off course, so far off course that it would be useless to continue. So he stopped and returned home. For his services, he was awarded 700 acres in Monmouth County in what is now Marlborough. He later went on to become embroiled in several religious controversies of his own making as a Quaker clergyman, but the 2/3 of the boundary line that he did complete remain with us today. The Keith Line, as it's called, still forms most of the border between Burlington and Ocean counties, and further north, it forms parts of several other county boundaries. And within Mercer County, it's part of the municipal boundaries of Hamilton, Hopewell, Lawrence, Princeton, Robbinsville, and West Windsor. So this is where he stopped right here. Here's Lawrence, and you can see that the entire eastern border of the township is on the Keith Line. And yes, that is why we have the name of Province Line Road. Let's look at a map. Well, I seem to be missing a page here. Oh, there we go. The land now occupied by Lawrence started to be settled by Europeans in the last two decades of the 17th century. By 1690, it was referred to by the name Maidenhead in land records, and by 1697, there were enough settlers to petition the colonial Supreme Court down at Burlington to form a township. So this is the entry, and it reads as follows. The inhabitants above Assunpink or Derwent was another name for the Assunpink used at the time, petition ye court to be a township of themselves by the name of Maidenhead. And that's it. In 1697, that's all it took to establish a township. So let's look at a map and see what that might mean. So here is the Keith Line, and this is Burlington County proper. And all this land, including what is now Mercer and Hunterdon and Warren and Sussex County, was under the jurisdiction of Burlington. That's a lot of land, and all of it was above the Assunpink, as they said. So did the court intend for all of this to be Maidenhead? The answer to that is no. Other West Jersey areas like Trenton and Hopewell and East Amwell were already known to the Burlington court. Their intent was just to respond to the inhabitants and their petition. I showed you the 1697 entry in the court records that established Maidenheads. Lest our heads swell, I should show you the whole page of the minute book. As you can see, the Maidenhead entry was just a notation in the margin, such a momentous occasion that I can imagine the clerk might have forgotten about it while compiling the minutes and gone back and added it later. The following year, by order of the court, the Maidenhead settlers laid out a road across town between Stacy's Mill, that would be Trenton, and the York Road, that would be today's US 206. This map, called the Warlidge map, dates to around that time and shows this York Road with New Brunswick at this end and Trenton at this end. Maidenhead would be about here. If you look closely, you'll see that the road from New Brunswick ends about here. Whether that represented facts on the ground or just some artifact of map making, we don't know, but it's clear from township records that the so called road from New Brunswick to Trenton did not quite reach Trenton, and it was left to the townspeople of Maidenhead to fill that gap. The original settlers of Maidenhead, the Brearleys, the Hunts, the Phillips, the Reeders, and so forth, were overwhelmingly Scots-Irish Presbyterians. Their forebears had come from the borderlands between Scotland and England and from Ulster. As early as 1698, they were trying to find a site for a church, and in 1710, the deed for the present church was granted to the congregation. By 1716, a meeting house had been constructed, not the current structure. Parts of the existing sanctuary toward the front date to 1764. It was enlarged in 1833 and again in 1853. And the graveyard at the Presbyterian Church of Lawrenceville holds the remains of many of the founding families of Maidenhead, including a number of soldiers who fought in the American Revolution. In 1760, the Township Minute Book records that a road was laid out to the Phillips Green Grist Mill on Assunpink Creek. This is today's Franklin Corner Road, west of Route 1, and Baker's Basin Road, east of Route 1. The map you're looking at is the oldest local map in the township archives, known as the 1789 Coleman map. It shows the Phillips Green Grist Mill and the adjacent pond. Unfortunately, it does not show the road. The Brearley family first moved to the area around 1690. They acquired a large tract of land in Maidenhead that today includes most of the commercial property near the intersection of Princeton Pike and I-295. In 1761, John Brearley built this house on family land for his son James. Archaeological evidence shows, however, that there were as many as 2 earlier houses on the site. But this is the one that was built to last. James Brearley's cousin David Brearley became the most famous member of the family. He was a signer of the U.S. Constitution and became Chief Justice of the New Jersey State Supreme Court after the Revolution. Perhaps even older than the house is this enormous oak tree on the Bristol-Myers Squibb campus that presides over the traffic light at Princeton Pike and Lenox Drive. It's called the Brearley Oak, and there's evidence that it was planted in the 1730s. Today, it is the largest black oak in the state of New Jersey. Among his many accomplishments, Benjamin Franklin served as royal postmaster for a number of years, and one of his tasks was to install mile markers along the Kings Highway post road from Philadelphia to New York. This marker used to be on Main Street, outside the fence of the Lawrenceville School, but it disappeared during the 1960s, either stolen or destroyed by vandals. It reads 36M to P, meaning miles to Philadelphia. There remains along the road in Lawrence one fragment of one of these markers. Much of it is broken off, but you can still make out part of the letter P, part of the letter M rather, and the 2P. This map was not created in 1776, but was created by the township to mark the U.S. bicentennial in 1976. It does a very good job of showing the layout of Maidenhead and its property owners at the time of the Revolution. The roads of the time are all in red, and actually they map very closely to the township roads that we all know and love today. We know that during the American Revolution, armies of all of the major combatants passed through Maidenhead, British, French, Hessian, and Washington's Continentals. Because of the prominence of the King's Highway in the early years of the Republic, I think it's safe to assume that most of the other founding fathers passed through as well, especially as the Congress of the Confederation met in Princeton, Trenton, and New York, in addition to Philadelphia. Jefferson, Madison, Hamilton, and Monroe almost certainly came through, and Washington again on his way to his inauguration in New York. For those of you interested in the history of the King's Highway, I recorded a talk for the library called Get Your Kicks on Route 206, and that recording is on the library's YouTube channel. Just after the battles of Lexington and Concord, the New Jersey Provincial Congress authorized creation of a militia. 4 militia regiments were created in what by then had become Hunterdon County, and the first of these included the territory now occupied by Lawrence, Hopewell, Ewing, and Trenton. The 1st Hunterdon Regiment comprised 7 companies, 2 of which were from Maidenhead, and the 1st Hunterdon was active in the major New Jersey actions of the American Revolution, including the battles of Trenton and Princeton and the Battle of Monmouth. Colonel Joseph Phillips of Maidenhead eventually became the commander of the 1st Hunterdon, and 2 other men of the Phillips family, John and Elias, served as guides to General Washington. One of the best-known figures of the American Revolution, at least in Lawrence, is this gentleman, Colonel, later General, and as a physician also Dr. Edward Hand. His series of holding actions on the afternoon of January 2nd, 1777, kept the British forces under Cornwallis from reaching Trenton with enough daylight left to mount a full assault on Washington's army. As a result, the Continentals were able to slip away during the night and surprise His Majesty's army in Princeton the following morning. Colonel Hand's trek to Trenton has been commemorated annually in Lawrence for over 60 years. Here's a group of Colonel Hand marchers upon arrival in Trenton outside the War Memorial about 1970. What many don't realize is that Colonel Hand was a very lucky man that day. Initially, he was not the commanding officer. He was second in command. The commander was a French officer, General Roche de Fermoy, who simply disappeared. He went AWOL around the time of the first skirmish at 5 Mile Run. As a result, Colonel Hand became the guy in charge. And meanwhile, Fermoy has made a top 10 list. The journal The American Revolution named him one of the 10 worst Continental Army generals. Fermoy apparently had what today we would call a substance abuse problem, and running from the skirmishes at Maidenhead was not the worst of it. After independence, our young nation was all about economic and geographic expansion. And during the first half of the 19th century, there was a lot of investment in what today we would call infrastructure: roads, bridges, railroads, and canals. And there was a lot of investment interest in turnpikes. The idea of designing a new road from scratch so that it could be straight and flat had a lot of appeal. In our area, the first turnpike to be constructed in 1803 was the Trenton and New Brunswick Straight Turnpike, which is today's Brunswick Pike US 1. There were several attempts to build this road. This particular map was from an earlier try that did not pan out, but the route was essentially the same. This section shows the turnpike splitting off from the Maidenhead Road here at what is today the Brunswick Circle. This is the entry for Maidenhead in the 1804 travel guide, the TripAdvisor of its time, called the Traveler's Directory, or a pocket companion showing the course of the main road from Philadelphia to New York by Moore and Jones. I'll quote it. At about the 36th mile from Philadelphia, at 6 from Trenton, is a small, neat, and airy village. In it is a Presbyterian church. The country here may be styled pleasant and fertile. About a mile from hence, on the east side of the road, is a patch of land of about 2,000 acres called the Maidenhead Meadows, a very valuable tract of the fenny kind. The soil is a rich black mold, in many places 6 feet deep. Its fertility depends upon the spring freshets, by which it is overflowed from Stony Brook. Its quality has of late undergone some kind of change, for the first annual crop of grass, if eaten by cattle, has a tendency to overheat them and bring off the hoofs, but the second crop has not that effect. It is something like the peat fenland, for when cut and dried, it serves for fuel, and in seasons of uncommon drought has taken fire and burnt for a long time. Well, it sounds to me like either Moore or Jones must have met a local farmer and gotten quite an earful. Anyway, the entry continues. Before coming to Stony Brook, the traveler quits Hunterdon County. That would be at the province line. The road from thence to New Brunswick separates Somerset County on the west from Middlesex County on the east. Each of these counties is rich, luxuriant, and well cultivated, and thus spake Moore and Jones. One effect of the Brunswick Pike was to divert much of the traffic away from the King's Highway so that it no longer passed through Princeton or Kingston. And this was upsetting to the merchants of Princeton and Kingston. The civic leaders there decided to fight fire with fire, and in 1808 constructed their own turnpike to divert the traffic back. It was called the Princeton Branch Turnpike, today's Princeton Pike south of Princeton and today's Raymond Road north of Kingston. This map shows its origin in Trenton, crossing the King's Highway at what we today call Harney's Corner and continuing. And this piece of the map takes us as far as Stony Brook and Quaker Road. Traffic on the new Princeton Branch Turnpike stimulated construction of roadside facilities. Foremost among these was the Princessville Inn, which opened for business in 1809. For the next century, its central location made it an important gathering place for township and even county events. It served as a polling place and hosted political conventions and town meetings. For much of this time, it was operated by members of the Mershon family. You can see it here on the 1849 Keeley and Otley map. W. Mershon was William Webster Mershon. And note that the inn was right by a toll gate, which means that everyone had to stop there. In a very sad day for Lawrence history, the Princessville Inn was destroyed by fire January 6, 1982, 4 days after the fire that destroyed the old St. Anne's Church, which we will get to in a few minutes. For the first century of its existence, the Presbyterian Church of Lawrenceville did not have a full-time pastor. That changed in 1807 when this man, Reverend Isaac Van Arsdale Brown, assumed the pulpit. To supplement his income in 1810, he opened the Maidenhead Academy, which evolved into today's Lawrenceville School. One other thing about Isaac Van Arsdale Brown, he had a problem with the name Maidenhead. Whether it was from deep principle or he saw it as a marketing problem for a growing boys' school is not clear. In any event, his clout in town was sufficient to convince township voters to change its 120-year-old name. And for those of you interested in the history of how the town's name was changed, I recorded a talk for the library called "The Name Was Changed to Protect the Innocent," and that recording is on the library's YouTube channel. The name chosen to replace Maidenhead was Lawrence, which, as we all know, was named after Captain James Lawrence, hero of the War of 1812. We were not alone. There are counties named for Lawrence in Alabama, Arkansas, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Missouri, Mississippi, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee, as well as the towns of Lawrenceville, Georgia, Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, and the Lawrenceville community that is now part of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Lawrence, Kansas was named for a different Lawrence. And after changing the official name of the township, the residents of the village agreed to call their local community Lawrenceville. And later in 1816, the first map appeared showing the township's new name. This map was prepared by John Randall Jr., who gained fame as the surveyor who helped lay out the grid of Manhattan Island. With this map, Randall was trying to show a possible route for the proposed D&R Canal, which would not be built for another 18 years. Public education in Lawrence Township began in 1828, when $100 was appropriated by the Township Committee for the schooling of poor children, and 4 citizens were appointed to a committee to manage the money. 2 schoolhouses were constructed in 1832, one on land now owned by the Lawrenceville School, and this one at the corner of Princeton Pike and Smithfield Avenue. It was known variously as the Brick School and the Valley School. It was decommissioned when Slackwood School was built and is now in use as a private residence. For those of you interested in the history of public education in Lawrence, I recorded a talk for the library called "What Did We Learn and When Did We Learn It?" and that recording is on the library's YouTube channel. Thomas Francis Gordon was a Philadelphia-born historian and geographer who wrote histories and gazetteers of the Middle Atlantic states. His Gazetteer of the State of New Jersey appeared in 1834. It listed the towns and places of New Jersey in alphabetical order, along with some key facts about each. These are the entries for Lawrence and Lawrenceville, providing a local snapshot a third of the way through the 19th century. 1,430 people lived in Lawrence in 1830. There were 1 store, 2 sawmills, 3 grist mills, and 8 tan vats, along with 339 horses and mules and 710 cattle. Lawrenceville was listed as the only village in the township, with 1 Presbyterian church, 1 tavern, 1 store, and what it described as, quote, a flourishing boarding school and academy. 1834 was also the year in which the Delaware and Raritan Canal opened for traffic. Of the 36 miles of canal that remain between Trenton and New Brunswick, 6 of them pass through Lawrence. 2 communities grew up along the canal, Baker's Basin, where the canal crossed the Brunswick Pike, and Port Mercer, where it crossed the province line. 4 years later, the Camden and Amboy Railroad constructed its Trenton-Kingston branch along the east bank of the D&R Canal, the opposite side from where the towpath is. The image shows the legendary John Bull locomotive steaming along the canal. The canal and the Camden and Amboy were under common ownership. Later on, the combined railroad and canal right-of-way would be used to construct the Trenton Freeway. Until the Northeast Corridor was constructed, this was the only railroad line serving Lawrence and points north. You can see it here on the 1849 Otley and Keeley wall map of Mercer County. To provide more direct service, the Camden and Amboy opened what is today's Northeast Corridor in 1863. This 19th century plan shows the layout of the new Lawrence Station. And this, of course, is Lawrence Station Road. And yes, you're seeing correctly, Lawrence Station Road actually crossed the tracks at grade crossing before construction of the bridge over the tracks at Quaker Bridge Road. This is a fairly well-known map, 1875, of Lawrence Township, from the Everts and Stewart Combination Atlas Map of Mercer County. There's a lot of wonderful detail on this map, but at this scale, the main thing to notice is the extent to which Lawrence was mostly wide open farmland with occasional villages. There was Lawrenceville, of course, and the Louisville-Princessville neighborhood along Princeton Pike, and then Baker's Basin and Bakersville near the point where the canal crossed Brunswick Pike. Other neighborhoods like Rosedale and Clarksville were too small to be noted on the map. And Lawrence is also notable on this map for enduring one of the 19th century's greatest proofreading mistakes. Then there was the area along the Trenton border called Milham, which was quite a distance from the center of power in Lawrenceville Village. In pursuit of home rule, the Milham neighborhood seceded from Lawrence in 1882, costing the township half of its population. The independent Milham did not last long, however. A few years later, it was absorbed into Trenton as the 8th Ward. And for those of you interested in the history of the Milham secession, I recorded a talk for the library called Lawrence, Love It or Leave It, and that recording is on the library's YouTube channel. In case you're wondering what parts of Trenton would still be in Lawrence if Milham had never left, this shows the approximate footprint on a current map. Right here is the Capital Health Regional Medical Center Hospital. Frederick Law Olmsted was the greatest American landscape architect of his generation. Among many other commissions, his firm designed Central Park in Manhattan, Prospect Park in Brooklyn, the Emerald Necklace in Boston, and Cadwalader Park in Trenton. In 1883, his firm was brought in to design an expanded campus for the Lawrenceville School. This is the famous circle, seen clearly in this early 1940s aerial photo. The expansion of the school, starting in 1883, was funded by the John Cleve Green Foundation. Green was the son of a Lawrence farmer and was a member of the first class at the Maidenhead Academy in 1810. He went on to make a considerable fortune as a member of the largest U.S. trading company doing business in China, chiefly in tea, silk, and opium. Green was also a major benefactor of Princeton University. Among Olmsted's legacies at the Lawrenceville School were the many exotic trees that he planted, some of which can still be seen growing on campus. Over the years, they've been supplemented by many other trees from around the world. In 1890, the suburbanization of Lawrence began in earnest as Joseph Slack and William Wood, Slack and Wood, began selling lots in what would become the Slackwood neighborhood. This 1907 image shows the intersection of Brunswick Pike and Slack Avenue. Here's Joseph Slack's plan of lots filed in 1890. Shortly thereafter, Trenton agreed to extend its water pipes to Slackwood. These home sites were within walking distance of the factories of North Trenton. In William Wood's obituary in 1902, the Trenton Times called Slackwood one of Trenton's most thriving suburbs. In 1899, the first trolley line began operating between Trenton and Lawrenceville, followed by a second line a few months later. Within a few years, both lines would extend through to Princeton, and Lawrenceville would be a stop along the way. For those of you interested in the history of the trolleys that used to pass through Lawrence, I recorded a talk for the library called Trolleys in the Lawrence Landscape, and that recording is on the library's YouTube channel. The final trolley to Lawrenceville on the Johnson line ran in 1940, but the tracks continued to be used for occasional freight service into the village until the early 1970s. And now we're into the 20th century. In 1904, ground was broken for Morris Hall, a home for retired priests. The Diocese of Trenton acquired the 120-acre site from the estate of Abram Rue in 1903 for $16,000. The first Mass was celebrated and the home was dedicated in 1905. It remained the center of Roman Catholic life in Lawrence until the construction of St. Anne's 3 decades later. Today's Lawrenceville Rehabilitation Center was added to the facility in 1971, and the original building was demolished in 1994. The construction of trolley lines from Trenton opened more of Lawrence to residential development. Early subdivisions like Slackwood had been promoted by locals, but in 1906, this real estate speculator from out of town, Jacob Wilbur of Boston, acquired the farm of Stephen Eldridge on the west side of Lawrence Road and began selling lots in what he called Eldridge Park. Wilbur followed Eldridge Park with Lawn Park, Ridgemont, and Trenton Terrace, which eventually became the Eggers Crossing neighborhood. He was the first, but not the last, out-of-town speculator to develop land in Lawrence. For those of you interested in the history of the suburbanization of Lawrence, I recorded a talk for the library called The Street Where You Live, and that recording is on the library's YouTube channel. The growing population in Lawrence in the early decades of the 20th century brought with it the need for fire protection. Trenton had a professional fire department starting in 1892. Between 1906 and 1915, Lawrence's 3 current fire companies all came into existence to serve the most populous neighborhoods. The first was Slackwood, which began in 1906. This 2-stall firehouse was constructed in 1921. In 1914, leaders in the Eldridge Park neighborhood organized the Lawrence Volunteer Fire Association, which eventually became the Lawrence Road Fire Company. This was the original firehouse on Lawrence Road. The third and final fire company was in Lawrenceville. It was organized in 1915. The growing population in the Slackwood and Eldridge Park areas made for crowded classrooms. This is the original wooden Slackwood School building, which was constructed in 1904 expanded by adding a new brick ground floor and raising this as a second floor in 1909, and doubled again in 1916. To relieve crowding at Slackwood, the Eldridge Park School was constructed in 1912 and expanded again in 1916 and again in 1920. This is the original one-story building. As for other schools, the original Lawrenceville Elementary was constructed in 1899 and destroyed by fire during the 1922-23 winter. The older sections of the current building date to 1924. There was a fourth school, school number 4, that was built in 1925 and closed in 1970. It was located near the intersection of Brunswick Pike and Allen Lane. These 4 schools continued to serve all of Lawrence's children in grades K through 8 until after the Second World War. I'm going to let you talk among yourselves for a few minutes because I realize that my computer is just about out of juice and we don't want it to fail catastrophically in the middle of this. So if you'll bear with me, I will be back in a moment once I locate my charger.
This conference will now be recorded.
In 1913, the automotive age arrived in a hurry in Lawrence, as Main Street and the Lawrenceville Road were chosen to be part of the new coast-to-coast Lincoln Highway connecting New York and San Francisco. This is the Lawrence entry in the 1916 official road guide, which drivers could purchase to keep track of the sights and amenities along the way. This is a circa 1915 view of the Lincoln Highway, looking toward the bridge at 5 Mile Run from about the intersection with Darrell Lane. And on the tree to the right is a Lincoln Highway sign with eastbound and westbound mile markers. 60 miles back to New York and 3,320 miles, 29 miles to San Francisco. 1924 is a big year on our timeline. The success of the Lincoln Highway catalyzed road improvements around the state, including at long last the paving of Lawrenceville Road, which was then State Highway 13. Here's the jigger shop on the newly paved Main Street. And here's another view of Main Street. The villagers in Lawrenceville paid extra to have the road a little bit wider and to have curbs installed. 1924 also saw the first in Lawrence of what we might today call a planned community. The Shabakunk Creek was dammed to create Colonial Lake, and the Colonial Lakeland subdivision was built around it with a promise of recreational facilities. The developer, who was another out-of-town speculator, constructed the dam and lake without telling anybody, but that is another story. For those of you interested in the history of the waterways of Lawrence Township, I recorded a talk for the library called From Assunpink to Stony Brook, and that recording is on the library's YouTube channel. Finally, with the increase in population and automobile traffic, 1924 saw the establishment of the Lawrence Township Police Department. Here is our first chief, Joseph Hopkins, showing off his Harley. You may be wondering What did we do for law enforcement before we had a police department? From the colonial period through the 19th century, there was a county sheriff and a municipal constable. Maidenhead's first constable was appointed in 1718. After the Civil War, the Lawrence Vigilance Society was established primarily to pursue horse thieves. This was a volunteer police force granted police powers under state law. There were about 80 of these vigilance societies around the state until the founding of the New Jersey State Police in 1921. The 112th Field Artillery Regiment of the New Jersey National Guard opened its armory on Eggerts Crossing Road in 1924. This 112th was created from remnants of the former 112th that was part of the regular United States Army in the First World War. But its history stretches back in one form or another as far as the American Revolution and the artillery that supported Washington's army at the battles of Trenton and Princeton. The armory has been expanded over the years, and today it is home to an annex of the New Jersey Militia Museum. In 1929, the brand new AT&T International shortwave station transmitted its first transatlantic telephone call. It became known as the Pole Farm, which operated until 1975, after which it was demolished, and it's now part of the Mercer Meadows County Park. For those of you interested in the history of the Pole Farm, I recorded a talk for the library called AT&T's Pole Farm and the Transformation of Mercer Meadows, and that recording is on the library's YouTube channel. I mentioned before that the New Jersey State Police came into being in 1921. Their first superintendent was Brigadier General Norman Schwarzkopf, who moved with his family to Lawrenceville in 1934 after becoming famous for his work on the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. His son, General Norman Schwarzkopf Jr., later commanded U.S. forces in Operation Desert Storm. This photo shows General Schwarzkopf Jr. when he returned to Lawrence for the 1997 Tricentennial Memorial Day Parade. The Schwarzkopf family lived here in the historic Richard Montgomery Greenhouse on Main Street until 1943, and Norman Jr. attended Lawrenceville Elementary School. The Schwarzkopf owned the house until 1950. It's now owned by the Lawrenceville School. Most of the Roman Catholic population in Lawrence was concentrated in the Eldridge Park neighborhood. By the time of the Great Depression, their ranks had increased to about 100 families, and they had outgrown the chapel at Morris Hall. In 1936, a site was purchased, and the new church was dedicated in 1938. In 1964, the St. Anne's School was opened nearby. But on January 2nd, 1982, an overheated electrical outlet box started a fire that damaged the original church building beyond repair. 4 years later, the current St. Anne's was dedicated. When the Johnson trolley line was built, it passed through the farm of Louis Eggert, and the point at which the tracks crossed his farm road became known as Eggert's Crossing. Eggert sold his farm in 1906, but the name stuck. The adjacent neighborhood, originally developed by our friend Jacob Wilberg, was called Trenton Terrace, but it also became known as Eggert's Crossing. In the first decades of the 20th century, Eggert's Crossing became a center of African American life in Lawrence. And in the 1940s, the Crossing Inn was opened on Albemarle Road, and for 2 decades, it was one of the major venues for Black entertainers between New York and Philadelphia. Among others, Ray Charles and Ella Fitzgerald performed there. The Lawrence Township First Aid Squad was established in 1946 with Captain Anthony Pilla in charge. Pilla was also chief of the Lawrence Road Fire Company. The ambulance was a gift from the Lawrence Lions Club. It cost $5,500. Through the Second World War, the only sanitary sewer service in town was provided by the Trenton Sewer System to homes in what was sometimes called the city end of Lawrence. With soaring suburban populations projected in both Lawrence and Ewing, the leaders of both townships got together in 1947 to create the Ewing-Lawrence Sewerage Authority. They constructed their treatment plant on the Whitehead Pond on Assunpink Creek, and in 1953 started connecting the first homes. The availability of sewers set the stage for rapid growth in Lawrence in the 1950s and 1960s. The timeline for the other major development catalyst for Lawrence was almost exactly the same as the sewer system. In 1948, ground was broken for the Trenton Freeway, which would utilize the 19th century right-of-way of the D&R Canal and the adjacent railroad tracks. In 1953, the freeway was opened as far as the Brunswick Circle, and 2 years later to Whitehead Road, right by the sewage treatment plant. In 1973, as part of the development of Interstate 295, the freeway would be extended to its current terminus south of Franklin Corner. With sewers and highways in place, the developers wasted no time. Subdivisions sprouted like weeds in central Lawrence. Nassau Estates, Norgate, Nassau II, Pine Knoll, University Park. In the decade from 1956 to 1965, 1,000 new homes were built. To support the growing population, Ben Franklin Elementary School was opened in 1961, and a few years later, Lawrence High School would be built right here. Nassau Estates began selling homes in 1956. This subdivision and the ones that followed were decidedly more upscale than what had come before. The developers looked in their crystal ball and saw a growing white-collar labor force in Lawrence. And in 1958, Lawrence got its first major white-collar employer as Educational Testing Service opened its new campus on Rosedale Road. About 250 people worked there when it opened. The majority of the 340-acre site had been the farm estate of Fred Schluter, who had been chairman of Thermoid Corporation for many years. Schluter's farm had been home to a cow called Bessie, which in 1957 set a world's record for butterfat production, over 1,500 pounds of butterfat from one cow. That's enough to churn out almost a ton of butter. The following year, another dairy farm, this one 141 acres owned by Harry Pate, became another campus and another white-collar employer as Trenton's Rider College moved to its new facility in Lawrence. And as the population of Central Lawrence grew, the retailers were not far behind. The Lawrence Shopping Center opened in 1960. This was the beginning of the end of downtown Trenton as a shopping destination. When the shopping center was first built, it had a much smaller footprint. It extended only as far as where the aerial thing, whatever you call that thing, is today. At that time, it was Dunham's department store. For a while, it was Staples. Towns that have plenty of open farmland rarely pay much attention to public parks and open space, and up to and through the Second World War, Lawrence was no exception. The mass conversion of all that farmland into housing in the late 1950s and early 1960s found the township playing catch-up. As a result, the 1960s saw the rapid development of parks all over town. Fortunately, the state of New Jersey had a generous Green Acres Fund that the township could tap into, and tap it did. During this period, Lawrence acquired the land for and began to build its first public parks: Hamnet, Veterans, Central, Colonial Lake, and Village Parks. Lawrence High School opened its doors to its first class of students in the autumn of 1966. 2 years earlier, township voters had approved the new $2.8 million school by a margin of 1,518 for and 291 against. This is a 22% turnout for a May election. Prior to the new school, Lawrence students in grades 10 through 12 were sent to Trenton High School. The following year, in 1967, officials at the E.R. Squibb Pharmaceutical Labs in New Brunswick decided they needed room to expand and settled on a tract in North Lawrence. Their facility here finally opened in 1971. The first 2 years were tied up in litigation involving the Township Committee, the Planning Board, and the Zoning Board. A group called the North Lawrence Citizens Association was formed to fight construction of the Squibb campus in order to preserve the rural nature of the northern port of town. After appeals all the way to the New Jersey Supreme Court were rejected, Squibb prevailed and construction began. In 1973, the interchange between US 1 and the new I-295 highway was opened, bringing thousands of additional daily travelers through town. Today, about 100,000 drivers per day pass through this intersection. In order to improve the housing options available to residents of the Egerts Crossing neighborhood, in 1969, the Lawrence Community Action Council began working toward creating the town's first affordable housing development. Ground was broken in 1973, and the 100-unit complex opened its doors to new residents in 1974. The new highways drove retail expansion in 1976 when Mercer Mall and Quaker Bridge Mall opened, making the US 1 corridor in Lawrence a regional shopping destination. Most history discussions are a recitation of things that actually happened, but in this case, I'm going to include something that did not happen, but that had a profound effect on Lawrence. In 1980, after years of protest, the New Jersey Department of Transportation officially canceled the proposed routing of I-95 through Somerset County. As you may know, the original plan was for 95 to peel off the existing highway between the Pennington and Federal City exits and travel north, skirting to the east of Pennington and Hopewell and connecting with today's I-287 near the Somerville Circle. This decision left US 1 as the primary north-south highway in the area west of the Turnpike. The state took much of the budget that had been allocated for building I-95 and transferred it to widening and improving US 1. And today's US 1 corridor is largely the result of that decision. Another 1980 decision that had a big impact on the rural end of North Lawrence, and that was this modest structure on Cold Soil Road, a Ewing Lawrence Sewerage Authority pumping station. Its construction provided sewer capacity for many hundreds of new townhouses and single-family homes near Lawrenceville Village. The $385,000 cost of constructing the station was completely paid for by developers. In 1986, another big development, Lawrence Square Village, welcomed its first residents. It was the first major development in East Lawrence, and it eventually became the township's largest subdivision. Developer Kay Hovnanian managed to sell all 350 units in the first phase in one day. Quaker Bridge Road saw traffic jams as 700 people waited in line for a chance to buy. After 177 years of educating only young men, in 1987, the Lawrenceville School admitted its first young women, 160 of them. After voting against the idea 5 times over a 17-year period, the Lawrenceville trustees in 1985 finally voted 25-3 to begin admitting women. That's 59. And our timeline concludes in 1991, right across 206 from Rider University. Rider, of course, was one of the first Trenton institutions to move to the suburbs, and 33 years later, it was joined by Trenton's Adath Israel congregation, which gave Lawrence its first synagogue. Adath received an ecumenical welcome from the Christian churches of Lawrence. 2 other Trenton synagogues subsequently also moved to the suburbs, one to Pennington and one to Newtown. More recently, the scope of religious diversity in Lawrence has increased tremendously, but these new congregations in East Lawrence are not transplants from Trenton, but rather transplants from around the world. The Sikh Sabha Gurdwara at Baker's Basin Road, the Islamic Circle of Mercer County on Lawrence Station Road, and the Radha Krishna Temple also on Lawrence Station Road. The Scots-Irish Presbyterians who settled in Maidenhead 300 years ago would no doubt be astonished at what a melting pot our community has become. And so there you have it, 300 years in 60 images. Again, you can view the mural whenever the municipal building is open. It's on the main corridor across from the construction office. And thank you again to all who helped with the research, especially finding images. Thanks to the Lawrence Township Community Foundation for funding, and thanks to Paul Schindel for figuring out how to squeeze it all in. And now I would be happy to take questions in the form of a question.
I did notice that there was a question posted in the chat earlier during the discussion, so I'm just going to kind of repost it right there for everyone to see.
The question is, how did Harney's Corner get its name? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, it was probably named after somebody called Harney, but I couldn't tell you exactly when. The most of the corners along 206 in Lawrence in the early part of the 20th century actually had names, like the intersection of Province Line Road and 206 was called Cox's Corner, and they were typically named after somebody who either lived there or had a business there. But all of the major intersections along 206 were named after somebody. So that's how it got its name, but I don't really know much about Harney.
And then it looks like we have another question as well. Who was Young's Road named after?
I believe there was a family called Young, and I believe that they operated the railroad crossing. Before they built the bridge over the Northeast Corridor tracks on Young's Road, there was actually a grade crossing there with gates, and so they controlled the gates, and they had a house and lived there. And I believe that was the Young's family.
Excellent. Absolutely fascinating. Just going to give everyone else a moment to type their questions in if there's any more. Oh, here's another question. What indigenous people lived in what would become Lawrence? Were they compensated in any way when Europeans moved here?
The indigenous people who lived here before European settlement were the Lenape, the Lenni Lenape, which were a group subdivision of the Delaware tribe that was all up and down the Delaware River in both New Jersey and in Pennsylvania. And there's plenty of evidence that they occupied this area for about 10,000 years. Down to the south of Trenton along the Delaware River, you've got the Abbott marshlands, and they have been extensively excavated and studied because that was a migration point, a seasonal migration gathering point for Lenape Indians. They would come down there to gather food, and they were definitely there, 10,000 years ago. And I don't, to my knowledge, they were not compensated in a specific way. There may have been some land purchases, but there was no global plan to compensate them.
Right, we've received quite a few more questions. We have what farms became the manors and village park and the village townhomes?
I would have to look that up. I do not know that offhand. There was a lot of farmland. There was Hendrickson's farms. Hendricksons still have a farm there. The Wilkes had farms. There were a lot of farms. Also, the whole AT&T site that is now Mercer Meadows Park was also farmland, and there were a lot of farmers up there. So I don't know offhand which farmers they were. I see a question, where did Society Hill of Lawrenceville get its name? I believe that the developer of that place used the name Society Hill for a number of developments in different parts of New Jersey. I don't think it's unique to Lawrenceville. And the question, when did school number 4 stop operations? I want to say it was in the early 70s. It used to be located down just south of Franklin Corner Road on US 1, right between Allen Lane and Franklin Corner. but I want to say it was the early 70s, and it was demolished around that time.
And then I see another question. Were the longer stream names repeats of native names? That's a good question. Do you know if there is a translation of Assunpink?
There is a translation of Acid Pink. It is a Native American name, and I don't recall what the translation is. But all of the stream names, Shabbaconk, Shippatawkin, Assunpink, those all were derived from Native American names. But I can't translate them for you. Sorry.
And Dennis, you can definitely provide some insight into this last question as well, but I will just jump in. We have the question, if I was interested in the history of a particular property, is there a way to research that through MCLS? Any advice? I am located at the Lawrence headquarters branch, and we do have a New Jersey room specifically dedicated to books and sources about the state and the county and the township. So that's always a decent place to get started for that kind of research if you're interested.
That's correct, and there's also a Lawrence room there, which has a lot of Lawrence-related material. It's not open on a daily basis, but you can check with the reference desk to find out when it's open and when you might be able to go in there. A lot of the property records for the township are actually maintained by the Lawrence County Clerk, or the Mercer County Clerk, I should say. And a lot of those, at least going back to the 1960s or so, have been digitized and are available online at the county clerk's website. For the older stuff, you have to go back and you have to go down there in person.
And then I love this because it's kind of like a forward-looking question. So we have, is there going to be a trolley museum?
Well, that's a great question. There's some people that are working on getting a trolley museum. There was some hope at one point that it was going to be in Lawrenceville. That is still kind of up in the air. There is some interest on the part of the county, as I understand it, on doing something with trolleys, and so all I can say is stay tuned. It's a long-term project. I don't have any direct involvement in it, but I know some of the people who are trying to work on it. And there have been a couple of trolley cars that were on the old line that connected Trenton and Princeton and came through Lawrence, and they would love to restore those things and put them in some sort of a museum in our area.
Very cool. I like that a lot. Oh, and then there is one more question. Let's see. What was the main course of study at the college at Rider when it moved into Lawrenceville?
Rider was originally a business college, not in the sort of modern MBA sense, but it was it was founded originally as sort of a secretarial school. So it had expanded quite a bit beyond that, but that was its original function. It dated back to the 19th century in Trenton.
Very cool. I think that's a good place to wrap things up. Tons of fascinating information. Thank you so much, Dennis, for sharing an overview of that timeline mural with us tonight. As he mentioned, you can visit that mural anytime that the Lawrence Township Municipal Building is open. And thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. We appreciate you spending part of the evening with us, and I hope to see you again at future MCLS programs.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, everyone.